We're now entering a world rapidly embracing EV cars. As a result, AM radio faces an unexpected threat: electromagnetic interference causing static and noise. Car makers argue it's a necessary consequence of innovation, while broadcasters fear losing a vital connection to millions who depend on AM for news and emergencies. This is a clash between cutting-edge technology and a century-old medium. What does it mean for the future of communication? Welcome to That's Life, I Swear. This podcast is about life's happenings in this world that conjure up such words as intriguing, frightening, life-changing, inspiring, and more. I'm Rick Barron, your host. That said, here's the rest of this story. The iconic AM radio dial may be headed for the scrap heap, a casualty of the electric vehicle revolution. For generations, AM radio has been the audible co-pilot for drivers across America, delivering a motley crew of news, sports, weather, and more in that distant, crackly transmission. But as electric cars go mainstream, their electromagnetic emissions throw a wrench into AM reception. Automakers like BMW are pulling the plug on AM radios in their electrified lineups to avoid the buzz and static that plagues the antiquated broadcasting technology when zapped by an EV's electromagnetic fields. Unlike the most robust FM band, AM signals are highly subject to interference from the strong electric systems that power EV motors. Let's talk about the origins of AM radio broadcasting. The broadcast technology we know as AM radio originated from the term amplitude modulation, the first method employed for transmitting radio signals. AM radio's widespread adoption in the 1920s revolutionized how Americans consumed information and entertainment. Families huddled around their receivers, tuning in to live sporting events like baseball and football games, presidential inaugurations, musical performances, and the iconic fireside chats of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. I mean, it wasn't Pandora, but it delivered. Now, enter FM radio. Frequency modulation, or FM broadcasting, emerged in the early 1930s, offering a significant improvement in sound quality over its AM counterpart. Now, despite its clarity advantage, FM initially struggled to gain traction, as most households possessed only AM receivers, and AM programming options were very limited. The tide began to turn in the 1960s when FM receivers became more affordable and accessible. Automobile makers integrated FM radios into their vehicles, and the Federal Communications Commission opened up additional channels for FM stations. By the late 1970s, FM radio had surpassed AM in terms of listeners' preference. While some may not care about the demise of AM's tiny sound quality, the move has broadcasters sounding the alarm. Dropping AM radio embedded in the dashboard infotainment systems could cut off a vital lifeline, keeping drivers plugged into emergency information on the road. As electric vehicles rapidly proliferate, an iconic slice of Americana may fade into static. The AM radio exodus is accelerating, with juggernauts like Tesla, Audi, Porsche, Volvo, and even Ford's electric F-150 Lightning. These companies are tossing out the antiquated technology from their EV lineups. So why is this happening? Automakers insist it's a reception issue. The electromagnetic muscles flexed by EV powertrains create inescapable interference, rendering AM broadcasts a crackly, static-filled mess. The National Association of Broadcasters is understandably riled up about losing this long-standing pipeline into the dashboards of America. However, not everyone is convinced that AM radio static is truly unavoidable. Experts like Pooja Nair from HD radio owner X Perry argue that some static electromagnetic shielding and rejiggering of components can keep AM alive. The catch? It would require car makers to open their wallets for the costly renovations on behalf of a dwindling fan base. With AM falling out of favor, manufacturers may decide that the endangered radio standard just isn't worth the investment for the next generation EVs. The AM airwaves could be going the way of the vent window and ashtray, reminders of a fading automotive era drowned out by the relentless march of electrification. For some, it's the inevitable demise of an obsolete technology. For others, it's the sad loss of the ubiquitous AM companion narrating road trips since the dawn of motoring. The electric revolution may be music to environmentalist ears, but it sounds like a death bell for AM radio broadcasters. As more automakers ditch AM radios from their EV lineups, stations risk losing that all-important commuter connection with their audience. Morning and evening rush hours are the bread and butter for many radio stations across the United States. If people can't tune in on their way to and from work, you might as well be broadcasting into a black hole. The numbers highlight the predicament. Nielsen data shows around 82 million Americans still loyally consuming AM radio, a full 20% of the total radio listenership. Now, skewing older, with a third over 65 years of age, these AM fans have been increasing their daily dose recently to over 2 hours. In rural areas, people tune into AM radio to hear important announcements, making it a cornerstone of everyday life for many that also serves a critical life-saving function during extreme weather and natural disasters. In rural areas, people tune in to AM radio to hear important announcements, making it a cornerstone of everyday life for many that also serves a critical life-saving function during extreme weather and natural disasters, National Association of Broadcasters President, CEO Curtis Legate said in a statement. But with the electromagnetic chaos making AM unattainable for electric cars, that robust audience could start fading. While the static future may seem like an inevitable consequence of technological progress to some, the AM diehards aren't broadcasting their surrender just yet. The airways fracas goes beyond mere nostalgia. AM radio may be an aging technology, but it still plays a very vital role for communities that have found their voices on those wavelengths, from ethnic broadcasters connecting migration communities to niche religious stations ministering to the faithful. The humble AM dial is a cultural lifeline. Now, despite the superior sound quality of FM broadcasting, AM radio maintains a distinct advantage. Its lower frequency and larger wavelengths enable the signals to traverse greater distances and penetrate solid barriers more effectively. This characteristic grants AM radio a wider broadcast range, particularly during nighttime hours, allowing its transmission to reach audiences hundreds of miles away from the source station. The expansive coverage area of AM radio ensures a broader listenership, making it an enduring choice for broadcasters seeking to maximize their audience reach. And there are the listeners in AM's literal fringe areas. I mean, we're talking about the rural heartland here, argues Brian Winnikins of Wisconsin's WRDN. His station sends agricultural reports to farmers toiling in info block spots, where AM's superior range is the only link. If these automakers can make self-driving supercars, they can damn well install a decent radio that picks up our signal, says Brian. Even Native Voices One, Nola Daves Moses, an electrification advocate, can't stay fully charged about losing AM radio connectivity. Her network language programming fights to preserve the languages of America's first peoples. Radio is our modern smoke signal, she says. Losing that avenue would be devastating. A catastrophic game over for cultures already hanging by a thread. The AM diehards aren't just complaining over dwindling listening options. For some communities, archaic radio technology is an indispensable mouthpiece crying out to be heard. As the electro wave washes over our dashboards, will our voices be garbled into static or amplified on new airwaves? The electric upheaval rocking the audio industry has stirred an unlikely advocate in the AM radio storm, Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts. In a bold letter to 20 car makers, Markey threw the weight of the public safety argument behind keeping AM radios wired into EVs. Markey said, and I quote, "When disaster strikes, broadcast radio is the most reliable way to reach the masses with vital emergency information. Phasing out AM altogether would create a hazardous communication blackout when citizens need those lifeline updates the most. End quote. It's a familiar scenario to broadcasters like Diane Newman of New Orleans powerhouse WWL. She recalls the chaos of Hurricane Katrina, where her AM signal was the sole conduit for conveying evacuation routes, relief efforts, and pleas for rescue amid the devastation. With cell and internet networks shredded, we were the only connection keeping the community tethered, Newman recalls. Stripping AM radio from cars severs that absolute lifeline when people need it the most. As climate change escalates natural disaster risk, the everyman urgency of Markey's appeal is striking a nerve. While streaming and data have become powerful communication tools, their utility crumbles under catastrophic infrastructure failure. In those moments of danger, the old-school AM radio remains the most accessible way to broadcast across the afflicted population. As electric cars aim to revolutionize transport, will their adoption come at the cost of this vital emergency channel? Or can innovative engineering strike the right tuning to keep the affordable all-hazard airwaves humming? The static charge feud puts car makers in the harsh spotlight between progress and public safety. But hold your horses. Automobile makers aren't ready to rip those AM dials out yet. After all, kids can just stream those dusty old stations on their phones if they're craving for some classic talk radio. Hyundai, for one, insists they're keeping those AM/FM knobs firmly planted in their EV cockpits. And some skeptics argue that this whole electric interference hoo-ha is just a lot of static. AM's bigger threat isn't under the hood. It's the demographic shift. I mean, let's be real. Does Generation Z even know what an AM radio is, let alone care? Not that the Tesla crowd is immune to some gentle ribbing over the AM axing. There were definitely some laughs when a 2018 Wall Street Journal headline ripped, "Your Tesla can go 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds, but can't get AM radio?" Priorities, people. But tapping into that old groove doesn't seem to be revving up too many engines around here today. As the electric revolution kicks into higher gear, AM's faded culture currency may be its ultimate undoing behind the wheel. Unless it can tune into a new generation's wavelength, those airwaves could be left eating the new industry's dust. So what can we learn from this story? What's the takeaway? Disdain for AM radio isn't solely for car manufacturers. Even radio audiences are losing interest in having an AM tuner in their future vehicles. Moreover, if you think your station's AM status is the primary obstacle, seek out an FM frequency in your area to transition to. Even top-performing AM stations will face increasing difficulties as this trend of abandonment continues. Securing a position on the FM band is a more prudent move. I wish I had better news and advice. Well, there you go, my friends. That's life, I swear. For further information regarding the material covered in this episode, I invite you to visit my website, which you can find on Apple Podcasts for show notes, calling out key pieces of content mentioned, and the episode transcript. As always, I thank you for the privilege of you listening and your interest. Be sure to subscribe here or wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. See you soon.